Hi, I'm Jerry Cole. For the last almost 30 years, we've been offering people products that allow them to get the absolute best from their table saws. Whether it's accessories to help you align the machine easier, alignment tools themselves are the best crosscut jig in the country. Our products have all been raved about by the experts because they work. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that the job of the table saw is to do one thing, and that's to spin the blade. Now you can buy an aftermarket rip fence to make that easier. You can buy an aftermarket miter accessory or peak your saw up, but if you're not willing to put the absolute best blade you can afford on top of your saw, you're never going to get the quality of the cut out of the machine you possibly could. It's been over 20 years since I met John Ferry and his father, the owners of Ridge Carbide, at one of the woodworking shows. I'd been running what's considered one of the best blades in the United States. I had a short conversation with John and decided to try a blade he called the TS2000. I was so impressed with that blade that it's never come off my saw. Now I've replaced blades, don't misunderstand me, but the Ridge Carbide line is without a doubt the best all-around saw blade line I've ever seen. And what I'd like to do is to show you why the Ridge works the way it does, and then we're going to show you some demonstrations that are absolutely amazing of what we can do on a little 1.5 horse contractor saw with the Ridge blades. This is the TS2000, which is really the backbone of the Ridge table saw blades. Now this blade's available in all the different sizes, 8-inch, 9-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, what have you. And it's also available as either a regular 1/8-inch blade or a thin curve. Now one thing I want to emphasize is if you're running a lower powered saw, say 1.5 horses or less, I really recommend you consider the thin curve, because what that's going to do is reduce the amount of material you take out when you make the cuts. That's going to reduce the load to the saw, and it's not going to bog down. Now, to explain some of the things about the blade, it's a 40-tooth blade, and it's called an ATB with a raker. Now, what you have are 4 teeth with a bevel. The top bevel on these blades, by the way, is 15 degrees. The hook angle, in other words, if we come out, what the hook angle is, if we take a line directly off the center of the blade, the carbide leans forward on this blade 20 degrees. Now one of the things that makes this blade extremely nice is, unlike most blades where you'll have 10 or 15 thousandths of tip height above the raker tooth, on the Ridge Carbide that's only 5 thousandths of an inch. So what this is going to give you is almost a perfectly flat bottom cut. No bat's ears like you'd experience with a lot of blades. And this makes it very handy when you want to do things like dados or rabbets and you don't want to go to the trouble to put your dado set on the saw or set up a router table to do a rabbet. And it makes it a very, very convenient blade. Now, one of the things I want to do before I show you how well this blade works on this little Delta is I want to show you I have no blade on this saw. And there's some noise in it. I don't know whether I've got a bearing on its way out or the motor's on its way out. But I want you to know that the noise you hear is not created by the saw blade. It's created by the saw. The first thing I want to do is cross-cut a piece of 1 3/4 red oak that we had laying around the shop. And one of the things I want you to do is kind of listen to the saw, because I want you to notice how little the saw loads as we do these cuts. And you got to remember, this is only a 1.5 horse machine. Some of these pieces are cut so thin you can actually see through the end grain on them. Now I'm going to get the W out of the way And what we're going to do is we're going to rip that board a couple times, which obviously is going to be more of a load on the saw than cross-cutting. Whether you can pick that up on camera, but that cut is just as smooth as glass. And the thing I want you to remember, we don't need a stabilizer beside even the thin kerf on the blade. Okay, there's a special tensioning process that's used on all ridge blades to stiffen that plate. You don't need to run a stabilizer. The TS2000 I just showed you has been my favorite blade for the last 20 years. It does a wonderful job ripping and cross-cutting on hardwood, plywood, softwood, anything you want to throw on the saw. The blade I'm getting ready to show you now is brand new to the market, and I'll tell you right up front, this blade is absolutely amazing. It's a 48 tooth blade. It's called the TS2000 Ultra. And unlike the TS2000, we have no flat bottom cut, but what we have on this is an extremely high bevel angle on the top of the teeth. Now the advantage to this, along with the 5-degree shear face grind on this, is we can do hardwood, softwood, plywood, and this thing I absolutely guarantee you will give you as good a cut as most specialty 80 tooth blades when you're working with sheet stock. It's available in an 1/8 inch, a thin kerf, which is a 1/10 of an inch. And the blade I have here that I'm going to show you today is called the ultra thin kerf. Now the one thing I want to put in perspective before we start is if you have any change in your pocket, I want you to pull out a quarter and a nickel. The plate on this blade is 59 thousandths of an inch thick. That is thinner than a quarter by about 6 or 8 thousandths of an inch. The kerf on this blade is 80 thousandths. That's about 4 to 5 thousandths thicker than a nickel. So what we have is an extremely thin blade that's going to give you a lot of capabilities when you're working either with underpowered machines or if you're working with very, very expensive material and you just don't want to see that stock go in the dust collector. This thing will save you some money when it comes to not wasting material. Now what I want to do is I want to put this on the saw and show you how it works. The first thing I want to point out, because of the thin plate, we recommend you take a pair of stabilizers, and if you buy this blade on my website, those stabilizers are free. So give me a minute to get this blade on, and we're going to show you something absolutely amazing on a 1.5-horse powered table saw. I've got the blade installed on the saw. You might notice I've got a stabilizer both sides of it. And the first thing I want to do with this blade is, I'm sure all of you have no problem when you rip your plywood. When you cross-cut, you might have some issues with tear out. This is a piece of unfinished oak ply. And what I'm going to do is just make a couple cuts. what I want to show you is even on the cutoffs and on the bottom side of our cut we just made, there is absolutely no tear out. Now, one material that can be a real problem working with is pre-finished material, because you've got that brittle finish on the face of it. So what I thought I'd do is I've got a little piece of pre-finished birch, and we'll show you how it works on that. To notice, there is absolutely no chipping, no tear out, anything on the underside of that cut. Now, an 80 tooth blade would give you those kind of results, but you sure don't expect them from one with 48 teeth. Now we're going to show you what this thing will really do. We use this little Delta almost exclusively for 20 years just to put dados in the Debbie platforms. And one of the things we did to make sure we had good quality control was to put a power feed on it. Now, I've got those a couple pieces of that 1 3/4 oak, and again, you got to remember this is a 1.5 saw, but I really wanted you to see this. I wish there was a way you could feel these cuts. That's just as smooth as glass. Now, I think that's fairly impressive. Now I want to show you something I think is borderline amazing on a 1.5 saw. Rosewood is one of the hardest woods out there to work with. I mean, it's much harder than oak and maple. The piece I have here is a full 2 inches thick. And I don't think anybody would expect to be able to cut that on a machine like we're using. Now, just to prove a point, I wish you were here so you could feel how smooth that cut is. With a block with 120 grit sandpaper and a few swipes, you've got a surface that's as smooth as anything coming out of a wide belt sander. Now, I hope we've shown you how versatile this new blade is. Again, it'll be on sale on our website at www.inlineindustries.com. and the stabilizers are going to be free. I appreciate your interest. Hope you enjoyed what you saw.